I'd like to welcome you all today to our congressional briefing, and we have very special thanks to Congressman Ted Poe and his coordinator for the Victims' Rights Caucus, Blair Gellis, with whom we often work and who has been extremely helpful over the years to hold various congressional briefings and other meetings. They are fantastic folks and strongly support the work that we're doing. What I'd like to do is just do a little brief introduction. I'm Eileen King. I am Executive Director for Child Justice here in Washington, D.C. And, you know, we all want to ensure that our children are safe. We require infant seats for babies. We require bike helmets for elementary school children. And you teens cannot text and drive. There's a lot we do to make our children safe. But there's one group of children who are not adequately being protected. And these are the children of separation and divorce, whose parents have separated because of domestic violence, child abuse, and substance abuse in some cases. When the safe parent asks state family courts, also known as divorce courts, to protect the children, they find that family courts are not equipped to handle the allegations of these crimes, and they do a poor job of ensuring our children's safety. Too often, they seem to provide a safe haven for abusers, not for sexually or physically abused children. In fact, more likely than not, as statistics have shown, the children are taken from the safe parents and placed in the full or partial custody of the violent, abusive, or otherwise addicted parent. This happens particularly when children report sexual assault. This national trend has been documented for over 20 years now. During these 2 decades, over 1 million children have been taken from safe parents and placed into the custody of violent and sexually abusive parents. In 1994, it was actually my sister Sherry Quirk who spearheaded a hearing with an oversight hearing to address the failure of the courts to protect children. This was derailed by Nixon's death, and so this was not possible. And then it just sort of fell silent. Nothing ever happened afterwards. And since that time, way back in 1994, the problem has become significantly worse. We have a panel of experts today to discuss this issue and recommend potential solutions. And I will also be showing videos that were created by students at the Boston University School of Communications, and they are students of Garland Waller. You probably all know Garland Waller, who's a professor at EU, and she has done the groundbreaking videos, Small Justice, Little Justice in America's Family Courts, and No Way Out But One. And she is an outstanding professor, and these students reflect the great guidance that they got. Joy Silberg and I collaborated with them, so there was a lot of very interesting creative process in making this happen. What I'd like to do is, before each speaker begins, to sort of set them up with a video. And the video sort of encapsulates in a very broad way some of the problems that we're seeing.
Welcome to the Price of Justice, where you have to lose to win. Just as a setup, family courts deal with divorce, child support, domestic violence, and custody cases. For this game, I'm going to ask you some questions about the family court, and you're going to show me just how much you know about the price of justice, all right? Okay. First question. How often do kids tend to make things up when they testify in court? Is it A, less than 5% of cases? B, less than 25% of cases? C, about 50% of cases? D, more than 80% of cases?
Well, I really don't have any idea, but I would guess about 50%, C?
I would suspect that maybe half the time.
I would say C, about 50% of cases.
Well, actually, it's A, less than 5%. Next question. How often is child custody awarded to a parent suspected of domestic abuse? Is it A, 10% of cases, B, 25% of cases, C, 50% of cases, D, 70% of cases?
10% of the time.
I'll say B.
Well, I'd like to think it would be 10% of cases, but I would guess that it's more like C, 50% of the cases.
Actually, it's D. 70% of cases. When a parent pursues custody of a child due to allegations that their spouse is abusing that child, how much money do you think that protective parent is forced to pay in legal fees? Is it A, less than $10,000, B, less than $25,000, C, about $40,000, D, more than $50,000?
Maybe 10,000 A?
I would say about $40,000.
B.
About 25.
Yeah.
Actually, it's D. More than $50,000. Yeah, that will hit you where it hurts. Your wallet. If your child came to you and said your spouse or significant other was abusing them, how much would you give up to protect your child?
I'd give up everything.
I'd give up everything.
Everything that I have.
Everything.
Everything I had.
Just about anything to protect my children.
My life.
All of it.
But there, you know, this price of justice goes into a number of different realms. You can say there's the price of justice to try to protect your child. There's the price we pay as a society because children and victims of domestic violence are not being protected, and Mary will talk a bit more about that. And there is just the price to us as human beings, I think, that we're tolerating this, and we need to break that silence. So I'd like to introduce Barry Goldstein. Barry is an internationally, I think, and nationally known speaker, writer. He is an indefatigable blogger on these issues and has written 2 books. One is co-written with Mohana, co-edited, which is the, I always get this wrong, domestic violence, abuse, and child custody. And then you also have a book with Elizabeth Liu on representing the domestic violence victim. And you have a book in process right now. So welcome, Barry Ralston.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone being here because I think this is such an important topic. And yesterday being Mother's Day, mothers have a special gift for Congress. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the Quincy solution. And it is a way, a proven way, to prevent most domestic violence crimes. And in doing so, save the United States $500 billion every year. So that's going to make things much easier for you in terms of your budget, in terms of the deficit, and it's going to improve people's lives. And I'm going to come back in a few minutes to talk about that, but I wanted to give you some coming attractions. But first, I want to talk about the courageous kids. Because as Eileen said, there's so many children who are being sent to live with abusive parents and really have their childhoods ruined and lots of times beyond that. And courageous kids are children who have grown out of the custody order, are now young adults and are speaking about their experiences. And they have a moral authority that none of the rest of us do, because the courts were supposed to be acting on their behalf. And so I'd like to introduce one of the courageous kids, Jen.
So I'm not really going to go too much into my case today, but I can tell from experience, from meeting many people involved in the system, that abuse turns lions into lambs. So I come to you as a mostly normal person, And the only weird thing is that I'm actually here today, because most people can hardly get out of bed. They can hardly put their clothes on and figure out what to do with their life. Now, specifically, I had 62 CPS reports filed on my behalf. I had 9 investigations done, and all 9 substantiated the allegations. So, there's quite a bit of evidence backing up what I'm saying. So, first of all, I think what needs to be done here is to treat a kid victim like a victim of any other heinous crime. So you have a rape victim who's an adult, and he's taken away from the accused abuser until the court case is completed, because you want to avoid victim tampering. So along with that, I believe a DA advocate and a multidisciplinary advocacy center throughout America would really help these child victims. I think to not do so is age discrimination, because it doesn't matter if you're a kid or an adult, you're a victim of a very heinous crime. And furthermore, if you don't take care of these kids that are abused, they grow up and they become the scum of society, the vast majority of them. Barry's going to talk in a minute about how the kids that, he's going to talk for a minute about how communities that allow this to occur have much higher rates of crime, all sorts of violent crime. So we're talking about a very large issue. And lastly, it seems like we have a couple aid members from the Congress members, and I'm glad to see you here. I wish there were more, but I'm asking you specifically to also ask for the federal funding required for these programs. It's not going to take $1 trillion, but it will take, a few million. I don't know. I'm not a financial expert, but we need federal funding to get the DA advocates, the multidisciplinary advocacy center, and a program that will prevent tampering of child victims. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mira Fox, and I'm an attorney for children like Jack and others, and I'm an attorney for the protective parents of children who are working through the family court to try to protect their children, and for the most part, not having any luck. I'm also the executive director of Child Abuse Solutions, which is a nonprofit which provides judicial council approved training in California and around the country to judges, attorneys, and court appointees like evaluators and mediators who are making the decisions in these cases. And I'm trying to train them all to a basic level of understanding what child abuse and child sexual abuse look like so that they can make informed decisions. But we're finding in so many situations that the judges are very resistant to even required training of that type. There are requirements in our state that they have to get a certain number of domestic violence training hours, and they just don't show up, and there's no oversight. We have a very strict curriculum that we got legislation passed that everyone needs to attend the training in order to be participating in these decisions in family court, and yet people don't show up and no one enforces it. So we're real frustrated. We felt like getting all these laws passed would make the difference that we wanted to see, and having a real strong curriculum would change things, and we've provided it now for 12 years. And we're just seeing that as people started to figure out that no one was watching, they just stopped coming. At first it was well attended because it was a new law and everyone was very concerned with complying and being able to qualify in order to continue being able to work for the judges in these cases. And then after a while, it's just getting more and more lax because the Judicial Council won't provide any oversight. And ours is one of only 2 states that even have those laws. The other states don't even require you to be a mental health professional in order to advise the court. I regularly lobby my state legislature in California for bills to protect abused children. So I have testified before my state judiciary committee numerous times on issues of child safety. I have negotiated with our judicial council on each and every bill, and I've placed them specifically on notice as to the failure rate of the family courts, not just in my state, but in all of the states of the United States of America. They have a 90% failure rate to protect sexually abused children in family court. 90% failure to protect rate. That cannot be tolerated. And all those state courts are funded by federal monies. It would be very easy to place some restrictions on that federal funding and just only give it to state family courts that are doing a good job of protecting children. It would not take very much to put one little stipulation in there saying this funding is only available to state courts which are protecting abused children from abuse. It's not that hard. So for all my efforts and the efforts of my colleagues over the past 20 years to educate family courts about child abuse and about family court failure to protect abused children, during those last 2 decades, over 1 million children were placed with abusers. And the children who are placed with abusers lose contact, and sometimes only have supervised contact, sometimes have no contact with their protective parents. And that can go on for 10 or more years. The Leadership Council on Child Abuse and Interpersonal Violence finds that a conservative estimate is that 58,000 children per year are being placed in the partial or full custody of their identified abusers by family courts. 75% of the children who are placed with abusers continue to report crimes being perpetrated on them, and these crimes are not responded to by the system because the courts which sent them to those abusers do not want to hear that they made a mistake. And so more evidence coming in after that placement gets ignored, suppressed, and sometimes punished. 18% of mothers who continue to bring allegations of abuse after having lost custody to the abuser receive punishments which can include gag orders, being jailed, being cut off from all contact, losing their supervised visitation. Often they're told that if they continue to report abuse to authorities, that they'll lose whatever contact they still have. And that's happened to at least 20 people in this room that I know personally. So if you need to talk to anybody to verify that what I'm saying is true, here we are. This is just a tiny sampling of the thousands and thousands of parents that this exact thing has happened to. In family court, many of these outcomes are completely avoidable if we just were following the law. Most state courts have good protective laws that require that child safety is the top priority in making decisions in custody, and yet the courts are not following the laws. That cannot be tolerated. Family court still considers children the property of their parents, and so children very rarely have an opportunity to go into court and speak and say what they need. In California, we got a law passed saying that children were allowed to go and speak, but the judges didn't want to hear from them directly, so they required that speaking to the judge be done through an evaluator, and they will only appoint the evaluators they've trained themselves, and their trainings don't follow the required curriculum. They're mostly about alienation, and they give them sexual abuse training hours for learning about alienation theories, which have no scientific support whatsoever. Well-intentioned, federally funded programs are being used improperly, and the most important one to think about is the Fatherhood Fund. That was intended to improve the parenting of underrepresented fathers, but because the only people who it actually gets applied to are those in prison or abusers who are smart enough to know how to work the system, those fathers are getting federally funded attorneys to fight against unrepresented mothers in family court. So, for example, let me see if I can say his name right, Joshua Komisarjevsky, who is on death row right now, had a federally funded fatherhood attorney representing him while he was still in prison, and he got joint custody before he even got released from prison. by just filing numerous motions against his wife. And the wife that, I don't even know if they were married, but she was only 15 when he got her pregnant, which makes her a victim of statutory rape to begin with. So here's a rapist father who's in prison for other crimes against children, sexual crimes, and robbery, etc. And he's getting, because of his federally funded attorney, joint custody while he's still in prison. As soon as he got out of prison, he waited until the mother was in the hospital and got an ex parte order for full sole custody of that child. And he received it, even though he had one of those bracelets on his ankle, because he was on parole for violent crimes against children. Within 3 months, he had already gone back to prison for having raped and killed a little girl and her mother and killed their other sister.
Why did he have custody of?
Well, he had sole custody of the baby that he conceived through rape. So this is the level at which we're seeing family courts favor violent fathers and abusers, and they're being aided by federal funds providing free attorneys, while mothers get no attorneys. Another example is John Muhammad, the Beltway sniper. He may have killed someone that you know if you're a local person here. He had a federally funded fatherhood attorney helping him get custody of his children at the time. And the people that he was shooting were not random people. They were surrounding his ex-wife everywhere she went. All of his sniper shootings were following her and terrorizing her by shooting all the people around her. He's a military level sniper. He knows how to shoot. And he shot people right next to her everywhere she went. Mildred Muhammad has come and spoken at a lot of our conferences to let us know that there is a price to society of family violence when it's not contained. And we may think, oh, that's just a family matter. But that is not a family matter. These men are raping and killing not only their own children, but many, many other children. The average pedophile has 200 child victims in their lifetime. There's a huge cost to society of not containing these men. And it's only a few men. It's not a lot of people. A very small amount of abusers are wreaking havoc on the entire culture. Psychological Association, batterers are twice as likely to seek custody as nonviolent fathers and just as likely to win it. According to the American Judges Association, studies show that batterers have been able to convince authorities that the victim is unfit or undeserving of sole custody in approximately 70% of challenged cases. Other studies show that when fathers fight for custody in family court, which is a rare occurrence, they receive it in 79 to 85% of cases. And that's because family court judges think it's so great to see a father fighting for custody, but they don't investigate whether or not those fathers are safe. And when it's proven that they're not safe, they're suppressing that evidence. A colleague of ours, Joan Meyer, surveyed the 2001 USA state case law and identified 38 appellate state court decisions concerning custody and domestic violence. She found that 36 of the 38 trial courts had awarded joint or sole custody to the alleged and adjudicated batterers. 2/3 of these decisions were reversed on appeal. This is particularly dangerous because 40 to 60% of men who beat their wives also abuse their children. And batterers are 6 to 19% more likely to sexually abuse their children than are nonviolent fathers. Exposure to battering is among the strongest indicators of risk of incest victimization. And according to the American Bar Association, custody litigation frequently becomes a vehicle whereby batterers attempt to extend or maintain their control and authority over the abused parents after separation. Courts are being mistrained by the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, which is a huge business which is established between family court judges and the mental health professionals that they train to disbelieve child abuse and then hire to tell them in every case that child abuse is alleged, that child abuse is not likely to have occurred. They're training this at the trainings. Those people are not coming to the trainings that follow the curriculum. They're only going to the AFCC trainings now. The judges are giving them credit for that training as though they'd taken a full sexual abuse and child abuse and domestic violence curriculum. So all they're getting is how to disbelieve the allegations. And those are the evaluators who are being hired over and over and over again. The ones that are trained by us are finding that they're not even getting the judges to appoint them in cases. And if they're lucky enough to get appointed in cases, then they don't get appointed twice, because if they find that the child has been a victim of domestic violence or abuse, then they're not asked back, because that makes the judges' work more complicated. But in fact, you would think that if you just resolved a case in favor of protecting the child, that would be the best thing to do, right? Because then the case would go away and the judge wouldn't have to keep seeing it back and back. So why does a judge want to have a case keep coming back? And why is it in the best interest of the system, of the family court, to place children with abusive parents? Money. It's just greed. There's a whole cottage industry that has risen up around this issue. If you place a child with a dangerous parent, then the protected parent is going to keep on spending money in family court to do whatever the judge makes her do in order to protect that child. And then all of the ancillary professionals who the court has trained have a money stream until that parent runs out of resources. And they also are sucking money off the abusing parents as well. So they're making all this money. You can find up to 30 professionals, court appointed in some cases, and they each charge over $100 an hour. And sometimes they have conference calls and talk to each other. And the parents will get bills for $10,000 for a day of work when their team got together. And they don't have a choice as to whether or not they can hire these people. If they refuse to comply, then the court can either seize their assets and pay the bills with those assets. It's like in California, the family home is either going to be sold to pay for these professionals, or it's going to be seized to pay for those professionals. So there's no choice, and the people are not neutral. They're not anyone that is chosen by the protective parent. The attorneys will often propose names, but the judge almost invariably picks the one that they like working with. And some counties in my state, one evaluator gets all of the cases. So they have a huge backup. You have to wait 2 or 3 years to even get an appointment. Wow. So it's extremely money-driven. And the parents on both sides get bankrupted by it. And we used to see it not happening in families that didn't have resources, because it was only interesting to do to people who had a lot of resources. But now it's being done across the board, because it's just become how they do business. And it's not just in California, which is a huge state, and it would be bad enough if it was just there, but it's in every state. Child support enforcement laws have turned children into financial commodities. This is an unintended consequence of the child support laws, which were put in place to protect children and make sure that they were able to keep on living after divorce and to the same motives which they've been accustomed to during marriage. One attorney calls children little bags of money. Not only do attorneys make huge amounts of money on custody litigation, the parent who wins custody gains child support from the other parent. So courts advise fathers, and this is from my own personal experience being an assistant to a judge in family court, not a very good one. Courts advise fathers who do not wish to pay child support that they move for custody. The judge I used to clerk for during law school created her own form. It wasn't even a judicial council form that she would pass out to fathers who didn't want to pay child support, saying, well, here, you could just ask for custody, and then as long as you have 50% custody, you don't have any requirement to pay child support. So there's a perverse financial incentive to non-custodial parents to seek custody in order to not have to pay child support. And then when they're not having to pay child support, they have a child that if they work 9 to 5, they need to get child care for. So they don't think about that ahead of time, but then they're getting their kid taken care of by the cheapest babysitter, while their otherwise stay-at-home mom, who's fully available, is sitting around saying, I guess I better get a job because my kid is being forced to spend 50% of the time with a babysitter while the other parent is at work. So this is not how the law was intended to turn out, but unfortunately it's how it's being used. So the federal government must ensure that states come up with a plan to separate parenting time from child support. We touched on this a little bit in the video, But I think it's important to know that the average across the country that protective parents pay in trying to protect their children in family court is $100,000. Most people don't even have $100,000. In California, because real estate there costs $1 million just to get a really small house, and the house is usually available, whatever equity is in the house disappears immediately. And then everybody's parents' money goes, and everybody's college funding goes. They will eventually lose everything in order to try to protect the child, and often it's all in vain because the children are still not being protected. So the cost in these cases is not just to the parents, it's to the child in terms of having to live in an abusive situation. Their whole life is going to destroy their life. Ferry will talk about the long-term consequences and the cost to society of what that's causing and what that's costing the taxpayers. In courts, in family courts, because there's so much irregularity in procedure, there's oftentimes no due process for parents. I've seen so many mothers, and I actually got a law passed in my state to prevent this because mother after mother was losing custody in child sexual abuse cases in ex parte proceedings. She wasn't even called to court. It all happened on the phone between the evaluator and the judge and the father's attorney or the father. And someone just came and picked up her kid, or she was told to come to court by her own attorney, but the attorney was not allowed to tell her why, and she was told to bring her child or her children. So time after time, children were just arriving at court with their mother, not knowing what was going on, and being taken by the bailiff to the father, and that was the end. And they said, "Thank you for coming." But there was no hearing, there was no notice, there was no opportunity to be heard. So that happens in states all over the country, time after time. That is the opposite of what due process means. That is a complete violation of our civil rights and our human rights, but it happens, and then those moms are not getting their kids back, even when they win appeals. In a lot of counties in different states around the country, there are no court reporters. So a mother cannot appeal, or a father who's a protective parent cannot appeal an unjust ruling because there's no record of it. The Court of Appeal can only base a decision on the record. Since when is it okay to deny litigants a record? Sometimes in some states they have to pay for a court reporter and bring their court reporter in, but if that's the case, let them know so that they can show up with one. Some courts have videotaping systems, where rather than have a stenographer, they'll just videotape every hearing, and you can get the videotape for $15 at the end of the hearing. That works great. If that could be in every courtroom, that would solve a lot of problems. But what we're seeing now is just less and less courts even have a record because they don't want what they're doing to be a matter of judicial review. We need to reschedule the oversight hearings that were set 20 years ago because we just cannot tolerate what's happening to kids. I've been in this field for 20 years and an attorney for 16, and before that a paralegal for other attorneys who do what I do. And we've seen, because I do follow-up with my cases, so many kids get to the teenage years and then suicide. And I can't take that. We cannot lose these kids. These kids were precious when they left. They may be damaged, but they can't just be dying. We cannot leave them to die. And even if they make it to adulthood, they're so damaged, and their moms have so much trouble when they finally do come home 10, 12 years later, shattered. It's too much to tolerate. It cannot go on. We simply need to fix it. And it's not hard. In fact, Ferry's just figured out that we can make it worth people's money to fix it because it will actually save our economy to fix it. And I'm so excited because finally, to appeal to everyone's pocketbook, that's where it will matter, right? Okay, so I'm going to let Ferry take over and tell you the solution. Thank you.
Hey, Isabella. Could you do me a favor? Could you draw a picture of your family at home?
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll be back in a bit to see your work.
All right.
Can I see your work?
Did your mother tell you to draw these and show me? These drawings are not admissible in court.
What's the point?
Quincy solution. It is based on some really good research from the Centers for Disease Control, from the U.S. Department of Justice. It's based on successful practices in Quincy, Massachusetts, San Diego, California, Nashville, Tennessee. So we know that it will work. And the Quincy solution is going to reduce domestic violence crime by 80%. It will save it will save $500 billion annually, and it will reform the broken custody court system that we've been speaking about today.
Just not to me if you need to, when you need the next one, I can do that.
Okay. We're ready to go. Okay. I want to talk about the original Quincy model, which occurred in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston, and it was used from the late 1970s until the mid-1990s. And it was put together by the district attorney, Bill Delahunt, who later served as a Democratic congressman here for many years, and Judge Albert Kramer, who had been the chief of staff for Republican Governor Frank Sargent. So it was a great opportunity for Democrats and Republicans to work together to do some really good things. And what happened in Quincy, there was a woman who was the wife of a tugboat captain, and one Friday afternoon she went to the police department and asked for help because her husband was threatening her, and they told her to come back on Monday, and he killed her over the weekend. And this inspired some leaders in Quincy to adopt a series of best practices. And Bill Delahunt took a look at the personal records of inmates in a nearby high-security prison. He found out that virtually every inmate had a childhood history that included domestic violence and very often child sexual abuse. So Bill Delahunt realized that if they could prevent domestic violence, they could prevent all crime. And that's exactly what happened. What it included was strict enforcement of criminal laws, orders of protection, and probation requirements. It also included practices that made it easier for victims to leave their abusers and a coordinated community response. Now, what I have done as part of the research is I've updated the Quincy model with new research that particularly encourages a multidisciplinary approach, with new technologies like GPS that has been used in many communities to help prevent domestic violence homicides. And there's one other part to it, which is part of why we're here. In Quincy, there started to be cases where the complaining witness stopped cooperating after her abuser went after custody. This didn't derail the Quincy model because that was rare at the time. The problem is that today, the worst abusive fathers have developed the practice of seeking custody to regain control over their victims, and the courts are so anxious to get fathers involved that they really bend over backwards and really are biased in favor of abusive fathers. So if we're going to have the benefits from the Quincy solution, we have to include the custody courts. We can't have the custody courts pressure victims to cooperate with their abusers. We can't have abusers use the courts to regain control, to undermine the laws against domestic violence. And the courts could use important research, including the Saunders study from the U.S. Department of Justice and the ACE research, which I'll talk about in a second, from the Centers for Disease Control, to change their practices to make safety and health of children the first priority. The problem is that most courts think they're doing a good job despite the research, and so they're really offended when we say we need to reform it. So that's why we think we need to pass the Safe Child Act, which says something that really ought to be obvious. When deciding custody and visitation, the first priority must be the health and safety of children. Duh. I think a lot of people would be surprised that that's not what we're doing. But today they focus on so many other less important issues, and they allow abusers to distract attention with claims of alienation and friendly parent and everything that takes the focus away from the health and safety of children. Now, when the Quincy model was in place, the domestic violence crime was dramatically reduced, other crime was reduced, and a county that had averaged 5 or 6 domestic violence homicides every year enjoyed several years with no homicides. Then they had one and then they were back to none. So these practices we know will work. The ACE research, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, is really important. It's going to help us in so many ways. And what the findings are is that children exposed to domestic violence, child abuse, and other traumas will have more illnesses and more injuries, not only as children, but also as adults. In many cases, problems that developed 30, 40, 50 years later were really caused by their experience as children. And one of the main reasons for this is that living with an abuser is incredibly stressful. There's few things more stressful. And this stress is associated with many health problems. And that's why it's such both a sad thing that we put our children through this, but also an opportunity, because if we can stop it, we can incredibly improve our society and save a lot of money, which is what this is about. There are important implications for society. Dr. Vincent Felitti was the lead author of the original study, and most of the studies up to now have been aimed at the medical community, and they can use this research to diagnose and treat patients, very often middle-aged patients. But what Dr. Felitti has said is that there's an even better opportunity in terms of prevention. Think about when the Surgeon General made the link between smoking and cancer. You know, that was really sad that by smoking, so many people lost their lives and suffered so much. But what they were able to do is prevention, using programs to discourage smoking, which has saved so many lives. So today, the Cancer Society, the Heart Association, would not dream of doing their work without a component to prevent smoking. What the ACE research shows is that so many diseases, so many social problems, you know, substance abuse, drunk driving, crime, are caused by tolerating domestic violence and child abuse. So that what should happen is all of these wonderful charitable organizations that are trying to prevent these things, they should have a component to prevent domestic violence and child abuse. And working together to do this, we can make our children healthier, happier, more productive. That's, I think, a huge opportunity. In the custody courts, what this means is that it is critical that we protect our children from domestic violence and child abuse. And one of the doctors I spoke to said that even after they've experienced this abuse, we may be able to help them. But the only way we can do that is, number one, the safe parent must have control of medical decisions so that the children can get medical treatment like stress reduction, like therapy, like anti-inflammatories, like exercise to reduce stress, things like that. And the child has to be safeguarded from further abuse. So of course, send the child back to the abuser or expose the child to the abuser, then it's not going to help because the abuse is cumulative. So additional abuse multiplies exponentially the health risks to children. So we really have to stop this. Next. You know, I started this by doing some research about the Quincy model and how we could end domestic violence. The reason I've turned this into a book for the general public, the reason I'm so excited about this was that somebody I interviewed gave me a link to a study by the Academy on Violence and Abuse. And what they looked at is the long-term health effects of domestic violence. Because in the past, we had studies that showed that the cost was between $5 and $8 billion. But that was only based on treating her immediate wounds. Based on the ACE study, what they went back to do is to look at the long-term harm. And as we said, just as child abuse creates enormous stress, so does domestic violence. So that many of the leading causes of death are connected with the stress. So that if we can prevent domestic violence, we're going to improve the health of women and children, and we're going to save a huge amount of money. The United States government spends $196 billion every year to treat health issues related to domestic violence. That's just a part of the benefit we can have if we stop it. In addition to health savings, and what the AVA study found is that we are spending $750 billion a year on healthcare costs related to domestic violence. Business spends $158 billion a year. Now, if they can reduce that, that can go to profits, it can go for investments, it can go for wages, it can improve our whole economy. That's why this is going to be so beneficial. In addition to the saving on health care, you're not only going to reduce domestic violence, which is crime, which is going to save you money, you're also going to reduce other forms of crime. And in this society, we spend over $1 trillion every year on crime. Now, most crime is not connected to domestic violence, but I believe we can save about $200 billion a year by this reduction in crime. The other major area is that women, children, and abusers who are involved with domestic violence often don't reach their economic potential. And that harms the economy. When we stop domestic violence, it is going to strengthen the economy in a huge way. And that's why it's clear that we are spending in this country over $1 trillion every year because of domestic violence. I think we should think of that as an abuser subsidy. And so here we can benefit. We don't have to raise taxes, we don't have to cut valuable programs, we can just stop this abuser subsidy. And I want to be realistic, we're not going to save that full $1 trillion, at least initially, over time as more children grow up without domestic violence in their home. We may get more of it. But I am convinced that we will quickly save $500 billion of that. And that's going to change society in so many ways. It's going to make the work of Congress so much easier because that's going to be a significant reduction in budget costs and in the debt. So it's going to have those benefits. Now, I appreciate that most of what we're talking about are state matters, but the federal government can be a leader, they can put out information about this, and most important, they can create grants to encourage communities to adopt the Quincy solution. Because once some communities start doing it and everyone sees the benefits, it's going to spread because this is so beneficial. Okay, and one of the things I want to leave you with is that there are all these wonderful rewards for the Quincy solution for protecting children. And some of it is just to feel good about doing something that really helps children. And frankly, I'd be happy to spend a lot of money to stop seeing all these horrible stories that we're seeing day after day. But there are also material rewards and more direct rewards. And I must share with you that I was speaking with a trainer on a recent vacation. I was telling her what I was doing and the kind of work I do. And evidently she told Kaylee about it. And I must say Kaylee's beautiful. And this is what happens. Kaylee's on the left.
Thank you very much.
The girl was fidgety.
And she couldn't make eye contact. I truly don't believe that she's telling the truth about the alleged sexual abuse.
My 5-year-old son is traumatized by this whole situation. He wants nothing to do with his father.
Even if the abuse happened, the only way you are going to keep your son is if from now on you act like this abuse did not happen.
The court has already made findings that we are going
to reunite these children with their father, whether the abuse happened or not.
People do not like to talk about this. Better get over here, sorry. People do not like to talk about this. And you're not going to see this widely spread in any newspaper, no TV program, no reality show is going to have this. And so part of our job, besides doing the things that Barry has spoken about, which I'll say once again, just to keep that in mind, is to spread the word, to ignite a conversation, to connect with each other, and to really become vehicles of change. Because like in any social justice movement, you cannot make change if you can't speak about what is actually happening. And people cannot see what you cannot speak about. So we've got to make that visible for them, and that's part of our work. And yesterday we did a march around the White House and carried our banners. A lot of people saw this. Let me stop this, sorry. Now it's pretty. Could you show it now? Yeah. Could you show that now while it's working?
Oh no, it was almost done before.
Yeah, we showed that before. We ended up around, many people watching us, banners everywhere, saying very strong statements about what's happening and around the White House and back again. And when we came back, we met a group that was doing a silent vigil. And these were men, women, children, holding signs, talking about the 300 kidnapped girls in Nigeria. And you could see in the intensity of their standing there and in the signs how deeply meaningful it was for them to be out there in front of the White House talking about it, or really making this known. And we're aware now of this hashtag campaign of Bring the Girls Home. And it's really heartening to see that we as a nation can bring so much focus and emotion to a situation like that. That heartens me. And it also makes me wonder, when will the day come where we can bring that kind of focus and emotion and action to wanting to bring all the children home who've been taken from their safe, loving parents who did give their all for them. And so what we're doing now is really coming to the point where we have practical solutions to offer. We have the Quincy solution that Barry spoke about. We have a congressional resolution that we would like to see enacted that would give as a federal piece of legislation, it would give direction to the states, just as the congressional resolutions did years ago when the Violence Against Women Act was first put into law. We want to see the Safe Child Act recognized and enacted. And we also want you to go to that site at the end of these videos that you will see if you go to the YouTube, to go and sign the petition asking for oversight hearings, because this needs to be more than just our voices. We have to enlarge those voices until they are a roar, and we have to have that bring these children home in the heart and mind and mouth of every person who cares, and where our true humanity is realized. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I stand here as one of the protected parents who was not listened to my child's accusations and my child's cries for help were ignored. I'm a mandated court reporter. I'm a classroom teacher. I'm supposed to save other people's children, and when it came to the time for me to try to save mine and get recourse and get her to safety, I was ignored. I was punished. Mostly, the most serious factor is my child was punished. She was given over into the hands of the named abuser in the face of evidence, in the face of her writing things down, in the face of the change in her behavior, in the face of her fearfulness. And this fear around it, because we don't want to talk about this issue in this country, we have people that should know better. Teachers, social workers, pediatricians, doctors. They don't know what this is about. You have your local neighborhood, they don't want to talk about it. And actually what happens is those people, because of the ick factor or this level of discomfort, they don't want to deal with this. They want to push this away. And you get pushed away. Your child gets pushed away. Your child gets ostracized in school. So all of the normal things that, and plateaus and activities that you would normally be involved in as a parent, as a child, get taken away from you. There is no normal anymore. Normal becomes regular visits to the courtroom where lies are made up and the truth is hidden and squashed. Normal becomes being put into supervised visitation where the accused is not supervised, but the person who's protecting the child is supervised. Don't say anything bad about the dad. Normal becomes your child in the courtroom, in the judge's chambers, getting threatened. If you say another word about your dad, I'll put you in foster care. Normal becomes the accused abuser's attorney saying to a child, taking the child on a tour and saying, this is the jail for holding them. This is where bad boys and girls go. So all of these people that are supposed to do something, see no evil, speak no evil, it becomes willful blindness. And that is a legal term. And it's also something that's enacted in all of these spheres. So teachers don't want to touch it. You'll have school officials not come to report. Subpoenas were ignored to come and testify, and nothing was done. The evaluator on the case was caught in perjury. Nothing was done. So we need to change this because we know what the reasons are. All of us for a long time were, what's going on? Why am I not being listened to? Because you're living in an Alice in Wonderland, upside down world. Your ability to comfort and protect your child is taken from you. And the person that the child comes to, like, you're my mom, or in some cases the dad, you're supposed to keep me safe. And you can't do anything about it. And you just, are ripped through the system, you're dragged through the system, paying fees out to evaluators who are not trained, and whose intention, it becomes clear after a while, has nothing to do with finding the facts, has nothing to do with revealing the truth has nothing to do with protecting the child and getting them to a place of safety. It is all about protecting the abuser. And we're all paying a price. My child's paid a price. I never thought it would, people would say, why don't you wait until she turns 18? You've done everything you can do, wait till she turns 18. I could never imagine, what do you mean? I'm her mom. Why would I wait till she's 18? Sadly, that's how long it took. My daughter will be 18 in June. I won't go to her graduation. I haven't been involved in a lot of activities in her life. Why? Because I did what I'm supposed to do. I tried to save my child. You're supposed to tell. You get punished by Child Protective Services, you fail to protect. How did I fail to protect? I reported. But along the way, there's been lots of threats, and this is a choreographed drama or travesty that is intentionally meant to silence everybody because there's too much money at stake ultimately. The other side that is another problem of this is that a lot of these people that we're dealing with, the named abusers, are also involved in child trafficking. They're also involved in child pornography. 60% of the child pornography out there is created in this country. A lot of times DAs and other people who are investigating will tell people, oh, we're not seeing that in families. Well, it's because they're exchanging it amongst themselves. They're below the radar. So this is a multi-pronged issue. And again, it goes through a program years ago, probably had good intentions. Bring people into the fold, help them become better parents. It's not what happened. It's quite the opposite. So over 1 million children have paid the price. Most of the people in here have children who paid the price. We pray every single day that our children come home alive and something doesn't happen to them. And as Mary was pointing out before, she knows about children who commit suicide. It becomes too overwhelming. No one's listening to you. Your classroom teacher's not listening. Your principal's not listening. You're silenced. You're isolated. What does that do to anyone? So, because some people want to make some money off this, they found a handy little arrangement. We're destroying our country. We're no longer practicing any form of democracy. We're no longer practicing due diligence or due process. Everything that this country was founded on, that people come from other countries to experience and benefit from, has been destroyed. We're very close to totally destroying it. Is it 25 years enough of this? I think it's time we need to stop. We're calling for congressional oversight hearings. We want these people held accountable. Where is the taxpayer dollar going? Even if you don't care, because it's not a personal thing, then do it for the money, because your pocketbook's being affected, as Ferry points out. The money's all over the place. There's a lot of money being made on the backs of these children. We call it blood money. So we're asking for congressional oversight hearings, resolutions, all of the steps that are required to get to this point. This has got to stop, because it won't take too many more years before we don't have a healthy child in this country, and when we no longer be able to hold our heads high up as a leader in this world. So thank you for your
Thank you all so much for coming and for being supportive of what we're trying to do and being a part of it. Thank you.